And hi, everyone. I'm Maria Grzanka, and welcome to Lean Portland's first Tuesday happy hour, the first Tuesday of 2021. Thanks for joining us. And I think most of you have been here before. And we're kind of a collective of people helping people make work better, mostly from the Lean and Six Sigma profession. And we gather periodically to share our stories, experience, learning about continuous improvement. So 3 ways that we get together. One, this is our first Tuesday happy hour. We also do free and donation-based workshops around basic Lean and Six Sigma principles. And we also do pro bono consulting with volunteers. And a couple of ways that we do that is, or a couple of reasons why we do that is to improve or have an impact in our community, practice our skills in continuous improvement in different organizations that we're normally working with, and also to develop our own practice and techniques. So I'm super excited today that we have John Ashcraft with us from Free Geek. And we've been working with Free Geek, and a number of you have worked with us at Free Geek over the last 3-ish years, I think, in a number of different capacities. And that's where the volunteer part comes in. We bring together volunteers to work on specific projects or kind of workshopping activities with our pro bono community clients. So here we are. John, I found this picture of you on the internet somewhere, but it reminded me of that day that we went out there to walk through, obviously post-COVID, to look at the flow of the operation and how COVID and social distancing was having an impact there. Okay, so here's a rough agenda for tonight. We probably won't stick to these times exactly. This is meant to be a kind of organic, informal conversation, somewhat replicating our experience that we would used to have when we would meet at a bar in Northwest Portland and chit chat about what was going on at work. So we'll do a little bit of a kind of interview conversation with John and talk about the ways that we've worked with Free Geek. We can do some Q&A, and then we'll do some breakout rooms for just general networking and discussion, and we can end when it feels like it's time to end. And hello, John. So why don't we start with, tell us a little bit about what Free Geek does.
Sure. Yeah, Free Geek's a nonprofit in Portland, Oregon. We've been around 20 years now. We were founded on the 2 kind of problems that our founders saw in the world. One was the problem of e-waste. 20 years ago, kind of definitely there was a big wave of computers from the 90s getting recycled or actually getting thrown away. There wasn't a lot of recycling infrastructure to capture e-waste. We know it's toxic. There's lead, there's mercury, there's other heavy metals. We know there's value. There's, of course, a lot of steel and copper, but also silver, gold, and palladium in circuit boards. And then the other issue was what we now call the digital divide. Back then, we just saw it as people didn't have access to the internet and computers. Even 20 years ago, it was pretty obvious that if you wanted to get the best education, shopping, government services, you were going to need to be online. Fast forward to now, a year ago, we were still arguing. You were still, trying to make the case that like if you don't have a computer, you're disconnected from society. Now I think it's just super obvious. You can't get any healthcare services if you're not online. And so we really thought we could shove those 2 problems at each other and help to solve them both a little bit. So on Earth Day 2000, we had a booth in Portland, Oregon in the park and said, give us your computers, we'll give it to someone who needs it. We found out pretty immediately that people didn't just want to give us their computers, they wanted to be involved, they wanted to come volunteer, they wanted to refurbish desktop computers. And so we made a volunteer program where if you volunteer with us for 24 hours, you get a free computer. The Willy Week put that in the paper, and the next day there was a line around the block, people wanting to volunteer and earn a computer. So for the last 20 years, we've been iterating on that, making the computers accessible to people who need them. We give free computers to nonprofits who apply and qualify. We give free computers to K through 12 school kids who volunteer anywhere in the community. And we've kind of loosened some of that up. So I think instead of requiring the volunteering, we're really giving out a lot of computers now, providing low-cost computers to people who need them, and really doing our best to reuse as much technology as we can and get as many computers into the hands of people who might otherwise not have the same access that we enjoy.
That's awesome. So I'm wondering, if this were not COVID times, would there still be a line around the block for the free computer compared to 2000?
Yep, there's a virtual line around the block.
Mm-hmm.
We are producing more laptops than ever before, and I'll kind of talk about how Lean has helped us get to that place a little bit later. But if we had 1,000 laptops ready to go out the door tomorrow, there's no shortage of school kids and unhoused people and lower income, as well as kind of the low cost people who would like to shop used or on a budget. We like to make that accessible as well. So demand for laptops is real high. Desktops is a little bit lower. A lot of people are certainly moving towards more mobile devices. But
so no lack of demand there.
Yeah, and supply kind of fluctuates. So a lot of the challenge is the processing and labor. So sometimes our bottleneck is donations. We really rely on government agencies like City of Portland, Multnomah County, and large businesses to provide us their like 3-year-old laptops during their refresh cycle. We can get those back into someone's hands that can use them for another 5 or 7 years of usable life. But when that's running smoothly, how fast we can erase the data, test everything, maybe swap some parts, a little bit of fixing here and there. That's what's slowing us down from just giving everything to. And of course, that's where the help of lean thinking and our consultation with Brian, Maria, and some of you has really come in. Must have been 3 or so years ago now that Brian and Maria, maybe you were there that kind of first week as well.
I'm
Brian,
not sure that I was there. I was going to ask Brian because I think he was the one that really connected Lean Portland and Free Geek. How did that happen, Brian?
Yeah, that was part of the Master Recycler program that I took through the City of Portland. And then we did a tour of Free Geek and John was the host. So we did a little talk and I said, hey, John, we got this group here in town that I think would be a great connection with you. And they already had some really cool stuff in place, which I noticed right away, but also saw some opportunities too. So yeah, it was that was how we all got started. And I can't remember who was involved, if Ernest was involved early on or Matt.
I think Ernest came in later, but
yeah, okay.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I was doing the receiving recycling thing, a lot of warehouse work, moving stuff around, getting it processed and out the door, not doing a lot of the refurbishing. So when Brian came in at the end of the master recyclers, like would love to like work with you to kind of improve things. That sounded real great. I invited the team in, and we kind of did a walkthrough of the warehouse. Decided that there was some potential, and the next step we started a charter with Lean Portland, and that was a very valuable step in the process because we kind of sat down and said, what is the most important thing that you're doing as an organization that would have the most impact? And it was pretty obvious immediately. It had nothing to do with my department. It was about testing the laptops. We had, I think, probably 2,000 laptops sitting in a closet. We were producing about 100 of them a month, and the rest of them were just slowly aging into obsolescence. And so we set a goal of over the next couple of years, aiming to quadruple that to about 400 laptops a month. We had a great value stream mapping session that Maria led that I believe basically identified that the average laptop sat in the building for 3 years and took about 6 hours of time. Obviously, we had more of a selecting the ones we wanted to build first, so it wasn't a formal system of first in, first out, or last out. We just kind of picked what seemed tempting, and the rest just sat there with no expiration date. And so seeing that obviously we had too many laptops that weren't moving, we were able to pare that down. We were able to see that we're spending like 6 hours of touch time per laptop, while when we toured similar organizations doing similar work in the nonprofit world, theirs was significantly lower. So just having that realization made it obvious we needed to change something. And so that's another big value. I think when Brian first said, "Hey, let's talk about improving your operation," like, great, this will be like some arguments on my side for why we need to clean up and why we need to like have fewer things sitting around. And I think there's really a lot to that when you're trying to like change an organization that's evolved over 20 years and everyone's kind of got their own, we've always done it this way, or why would we change? Things seem to be fine. Really looking at the numbers, having data that says, half of your laptops are never going to be built at this rate, and the ones that are being built, cost more in labor than it would cost to buy a new one. And we're not there anymore, but that's kind of what it started to look like when we did that math. Another thing I wanted to kind of dive into is, and I'll come back to laptops, but thinking about the pandemic, let me change my background real quick. I know how to do that. So this was about 10 years ago. We had about 10 people crowded around a table with hammers and pliers and screwdrivers, taking apart printers for their precious metals. Well, specifically to separate circuit boards from clean plastic from kind of steel scrap that was going to a shredder. At that time, before Lean showed up just a little bit, kind of started to realize that there are machines that can do this work as well as humans. Printers can get smashed up and mechanically separated. But for us, we'd been doing it for years. We could say like, we make an extra $10 an hour by separating the materials rather than selling the printers whole. But if you think about it, having 12 people around a table doing a dirty job to make $10 an hour collectively and take stuff apart, it took a lot of footprint, it took a lot of time, it took a lot of resources, and didn't significantly improve the environment. So that was one of the things that we were able to kind of shift off of our plate. Like, the work doesn't need to be done here. This is not super efficient. A lot of waste in that. But the challenge was, this was hundreds of hours of volunteer time a week. You can see some kids there having a great experience. And so it was really obvious we needed to preserve that experience as long as we could. even after this, we would, when Brian and Maria showed up, we had about 12 volunteers at a time in the warehouse doing jobs that were really better done by humans than machines at the time in terms of environmental impact and income. And then suddenly, 9 or 10 months ago, we realized with like 3 days notice that we couldn't have volunteers in the building anymore, but there was still work to be done. Brian and Maria came in and we talked a little bit about mostly the kind of health and safety things about signage and removing high touch areas. But the tools that I got from a couple dozen sessions sitting in the meeting room with Brian, Maria, Ernest, really helped me, think in lean ways as we saw that we had to find a way to do the core of our work with 20% of the human hours. We were able to kind of gather some data, kind of do the same comparison we did before with printers. Like volunteers have been taking apart or taking the boards off of laptop hard drives. And the circuit boards are worth a lot. The drives are worth a little if they still have the boards on them. But when we did the math, we saw that dollars per hour, that's a tedious job. It can get recycled mechanically. But the larger drives, we make like $50 an hour if we put staff time into it, assuming staff can work very fast. So I'm going to change my background again. I know I'm rambling, so if anyone wants to jump in, feel free, but this is one of the points I wanted to make about how we've changed over the pandemic. So now instead of a table with 6 people and hand tools, I've got a couple of these stations where there's a spring balancer, push to start drill that moves about 8 or 10 times faster rotations than our old tools. It's more ergonomic. You're standing up. You've got every tool you might need in reach. You've got a bin for every output in reach. And so you can basically do the job of 4 or 5 volunteers in the same amount of staff time. So it was, in the end, pretty painless to adapt from having the volunteers doing our work while we supervised to just kind of diving in and doing that work, hopefully in an ergonomic way that is also pretty efficient. Unless anyone stops me, I'm going to talk about laptops. Cool.
Yeah, well, I will say that that's awesome. I love the way that you've evolved and came up with different ways to improve that workstation. I do want to go back to something you said earlier about the laptops taking like 6 hours or something like that to go, like it was like 6 hours of process time on the laptop. And also you were talking about comparing to other organizations that were doing it a lot faster. What did that comparison look like? And were they also organizations that did the same kind of like volunteer experience that Free Geek is all about?
Yeah, there's quite a variety. So there's a kind of umbrella organization called AFTR, AFTRR, which is the Alliance for Technology, Refurbishment, and Repair. And we're all nonprofits. There's about 90 of us now. Probably 5 or 6 are in the kind of same league as Free Geek in terms of throughput and scale. Some are bigger. And some of them have no volunteers at all. It's entirely staff. And because of that, obviously they have, some of them explicitly done a lot of lean work and can track that, per desktop computer, let's say, there's like 20 or 30 minutes of staff touch time. And if it goes to 35 minutes, they, recycle that one and move on to something else. And we would tend to do kind of, and then a little bit of an assembly line there too, where they might have a table where they like set out 10 computers, and by the time each one's done with its like processing process that doesn't require touch time, then the first one's ready. and some of them even had little conveyor roller belts moving from station to station.
Mhm.
So by touring other similar organizations doing similar work, we really got to see a lot of things that were obviously more efficient than ours. Uh, One of the big challenges kind of culturally, and I think it's legitimate, is a lot of those programs didn't have volunteers. And I like to think of like a triple bottom line for my department.
Mhm.
We're doing the right thing for the environment. Are we doing the right thing for our budget? And is this a meaningful job for volunteers that gives them job skills, education, uh, even for some of our volunteers, the chance to like socialize in a community? Is it like a happy, healthy thing for a human to be doing here?
Mhm.
And so there was some real pushback with like, well, we could do it better and faster, but then what would the volunteers learn if all they're doing is
Mhm.
a repetitive assembly line task? And so that's been a challenge that we've struggled with in the refurbishment department. As I said, that's Lean Portland, and Free Geek decided that laptops is where we wanted to put our efforts into increasing the number of laptops we could get out the door, assuming we couldn't increase the number of staff. We've made steady but kind of slow progress. We're really in a good place right now, and we're continuing that work of trying to even capture kind of the value if you count the cost of the space, the cost of the time, the cost of the parts. How much does it really cost to refurbish and give away a computer?
Mhm.
And as we've done that for things like Apple computers, Windows laptops, Linux laptops, desktop computers, just this last month, Amber Schmidt, who's our lead there, has seen some numbers that again are significant enough to drive change. We can focus on the things that make a lot of sense and either troubleshoot or deprioritize the ones that end up costing us more than they're worth relative to the other things we can be doing.
Well, I think I do want to point out that I think slow and steady is brilliant. I think it's really easy to want to go for the bright, shiny object, like look at our efficiency numbers or productivity numbers. And one of the great things about something like value stream mapping is you can see the process time, but you also saw that the laptops were sitting there for 3 years before they actually made it through. So, while that's not the sexiest thing to improve, it can actually make a huge impact on the operation over a longer period of time. So, in that longer period of time, how has the laptop production area changed or evolved?
Yeah, one of the things that came out of value stream mapping was basically a dashboard for Free Geek, where you're like, well, if we don't know how many computers we've even refurbished in the, on an average month, how can we measure improvement in that area? So Amber and I kind of worked on tracking that, and our first year with this dashboard was 2017, and we refurbished 1,381 laptops that year. Last year, 2020, we think we refurbished 3,500. So basically 3 times as many with effectively fewer staff dedicated to it, and uh, no volunteers in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And did you reduce the number of years they were on the shelf?
Yeah, for sure. That closet that was full of things that were unorganized and just piles, grab whatever looks the most interesting, is now much more organized. We've got metro style wire shelves with postal style bins that each have about 10 laptops. They're generally evaluated as they go into the closet instead of when we were working with Maria, we kind of estimated like half of the things we've had stored for 3 years were just broken to begin with and not refurbishable. So now we're kind of filtering out, do these have potential to keep them? And we actually almost ran out of laptops for a couple of weeks during the pandemic.
Wow.
Demand was high, supply slowed down. So we really got to the bottom of the barrel of the last, like, if nothing comes in the door tomorrow, we might not have anything for the refurbishment team to do, which is both a good argument for having a buffer, because supply can die out in the uncertain industry we're in, but also, in my mind, a buffer is kind of only optimal if it sometimes fills and sometimes empties, and if it's
Mhm.
always like if it's always full, then it's just storage. Is how I think of it.
I have some questions actually, John, and one of my questions had to do with demand and how you address that. And you kind of just did, but that is really in a atypical situation as this pandemic, but in a regular pre-COVID, post-COVID, how does that pull actually happen, or how does demand relate to what you have?
That's an
Oh.
excellent question. We spent a lot of time with Lean Portland kind of talking about even just defining push and pull. And I want to kind of shout out that that's another big value of these sorts of conversations, is just getting shared language, just kind of being exposed to those concepts. I say Free Geek is 20 years old. I'm pretty confident that for first 17 of them, we were entirely push-based. Something comes in the door, the first person who sees it says, "This is cool, it must be reused." They push it on to someone else, and they're like, "I've got it now, it's on my pile, I have to do everything in my pile." And then it makes it to the store, and either the store's like, "Cool, we'll put it out there for $1 and see if anyone wants it," or nobody wants it for $1, send it back to recycling. So it used to be pretty common for me to get in recycling boxes of devices that had been tested, sat around in the store and got recycled. And that was particularly frustrating when I knew we were still actively testing those same items. So it was really entirely push, and without, I mean, obviously there are a lot of smart people working together. It was fairly dysfunctional from a push only side, which, as the receiving person, I want to push things out because I'm like, we can't bear to not reuse this. We love reuse. But with that language, we put a lot of effort into talking about our sales channel and our hardware grants channel and our other programs of giving free computers. What do they want? So during the pandemic, we shut down our store, our physical store, and now it's all online. So there are some things that you might put on the shelf for $1, and somebody finds it and they're like, "Cool," but it doesn't make sense to sell that online and ship it. And so the things that we're sending that way to be tested have really changed, and we're better able to shift to that after moving towards more of a pull-based system ideally, but realistically kind of a hybrid system. That gave us the opportunity to ask the really big questions, like, what does our community need most? Laptops, desktops, and at what ratio? Rather than saying, we've got a bunch of great desktops, we have to reuse them because we can't bear to recycle them, build them, fill up shelves until they're overflowing and everyone gets frustrated. It gave us an opportunity to look for other channels. So there are some desktop computers that aren't good enough for our community, but are good enough to be sold in pallets to wholesalers. So I still like to push a little bit, just because I'm getting the stuff that our stream is really varied and unique. So I can't say, I'll order you up 1,000 laptops this month. We're going to get what we can get, and we can try to advertise for that. But then we'll also get really weird one-off stuff that if you don't research it, make an argument that this is actually worth trying to sell on eBay, then it might just get recycled.
I remember when we were there last, there was like a vintage kind of like Apple machine. Well, it still said Macintosh on it. That looked like it was kind of a green screen sort of thing.
Yeah. Uh, so yeah, we're still a little chaotic in a good way, I think. Maybe more than I like, but we do get those weird cool things, and either there is an end market for it, or just the personalities of the team are like, this is cool and nostalgic. We
Yeah.
want to put time into this. Maybe we sell it at a bit of a loss if you account for all that time.
Mhm.
But then our community loves it too, seeing all the weird stuff kind of
It is
different.
Portland after all.
Yeah. Yeah, we've really been able to focus on not only what types of things our programs need, but we're now starting to talk about having uh, better tools for predicting what we need. And we might reach out to Maria and maybe Brian about this in the next couple of months, is kind of having a calendar for production. Right now, someone says, hey, Amber, I need 20 laptops next week. And she scrambles. But if we could say, 2 months from now, you need, 180 laptops, and we predict we can do that, and here's what we need. Uh, and when they come in, they will go to you, versus uh, kind of all that feast or famine stress of, we
Mhm.
just got an order for 100 things that we hadn't talked about last week, and drop everything and do it.
What other questions are out there? Thanks, May.
Don, did you have any change in the floor space? You mentioned you freed up some of the inventory, but how has the space changed for laptops?
Yeah, great question. Laptops I'm not as expert on as Amber, but I think that space changed by having one person in the room instead of two or three, and people are actually taking laptops home to work on them there. And that wouldn't have made sense a couple of years ago without some of the improvements we made to the process. We got better software tools. We eliminated some steps that were time intensive and kind of specialty hardware intensive. Uh, so having a more lean process means that you can take a stack of laptop computers home as long as you've got a good internet connection and a small box of parts and tools, that it's a much more modular job. In my area, since probably a third of the whole warehouse was dedicated to those volunteer activities, I was actually alone in the warehouse for like 2 months while staff took voluntary furloughs, but we were still receiving, stuff was coming in. It gave me a chance to really gut out a lot of the old furniture, the benches and the tables that volunteers worked on. Now have the specialty workstations behind me, and most of this stuff was kind of donated. I think these shelves came from IBM and probably cost thousands of dollars when new, but they were moving and had some surplus furniture, and so we're always going to have a little bit of that, but then customize it to meet our needs. Uh, Again, the tools of Lean Portland have really helped in that process. I was talking to Maria earlier. I've never really got to the fifth S in 5S. I'm not like any kind of expert, but forcing myself to think about, hey, sort and settle, everything has a place and there's a place for everything. The idea of like, if you haven't touched it in 6 months, why is it there? Really gave me a lot of confidence to just get rid of a bunch of stuff, uh, make a standard set of tools, a standard set of bins, and say, and really push back against or with my team who are like, I just want to set it up my own way because this is a little weird. To having it standardized is better than perfect. If anyone can like step into the shared space on a different shift, know where all the tools are, know where all the parts go, and that it's going to save you from walking around the room and having to, you know, find tools all the time. So, well, I have very little expertise in something like 5S. Having the awareness that Brian and Maria have given me is applied every week in the work that we do, and made it fairly easy to overhaul the warehouse with a really eye to limiting movement, limiting space, kind of maximizing the outputs for time.
Curious about when you use the term refurbish, and what standard is that? I mean, what's the procedure, and whether there's what does that actually mean for you guys?
Yeah. So if we think about a laptop computer, the first thing we're going to do is ensure data security. So we're going to pull out the hard drive. We're either going to wipe it using industry standards, or we're going to punch a hole in it and destroy that hard drive. So we're doing data security. We're doing a lot of standard tests, the load test on the memory and the processor, making sure all the main functions work, the screen, the keyboards, the hard drive, any speakers, that sort of thing. And then just a little bit of a cleanup. We're not really doing soldering work. We'll swap parts on things that are worthwhile. But, if somebody dropped a cheap laptop and broke the screen, we're probably going to sell that, pull parts from that and recycle it. But if it's a high-end MacBook, we can spend a day fixing just about anything. So,
Question.
I don't have a dictionary definition for refurbishment. It's not, it should be good enough to use as if it were new. One
Thank
thing
you.
I want to make a point of bringing up is Lean Portland has always been super generous with their time, and the big challenge from my perspective has been the commitment from our side. I had high expectations for, like, really, if Lean Portland is putting this much effort into it, we owe them to really do homework and to take advantage of every meeting. And so in the early days, we had meetings every couple of weeks, and not a lot of homework happened between. And a lot of the meetings tended to have a little bit of, the first half of the meeting is recapping what we talked about last week. And there wasn't a lot of work being done. So we probably had, 10 hours of meetings before we did the value stream mapping, which we actually did in real time on a whiteboard. And so that kind of practical doing it together was probably the most effective. Of course, I learned a lot in a lot of the meetings, but without having invested in time in doing the homework, I really didn't get the most out of that. Sometimes I feel guilty about that, but as you work with other people, if you don't have that kind of high level of engagement with somebody who's got the free time to read the books and to, like, do the practice, and we talked about a daily huddle board, and we probably had 4 or 5 meetings on that. And every time, like, cool, I'm going to go make a whiteboard and put it up in my team and train everyone to use it and normalize using it, and not let it drop when things get busy or weird. And still, that's still on my to-do list. Like, I've got a whiteboard. It's got some stuff on it, but we don't talk about it every day. We're not to the Toyota level. And so my expectations early were like, there's so much opportunity to improve. We really need to jump on that. And again, Lean was super generous, and we didn't take the most advantage of that. But what I've come to terms with is, I mentioned we're doing three times as many laptops with fewer resources. And a lot of that is because of the conversations and the tools and the shared language, and the actual, like, value stream mapping and 5S that we've done with Lean. Happy to see if anyone's got questions about any of that too.
A point John, I think part of the success we've had there, or you're having with Lean, is because of your involvement. So thank you. That's been key to all of the work that the organization has done, your role and your commitment and how you educate people. So anyway, I just want to say that. My question is more about that whiteboard you mentioned and daily huddles. I'm curious what kind of engagement you have with the volunteer team, like with what would look like a daily huddle, like go over the goals of the day or metrics or.
We never really designed the huddle to be volunteer oriented. Just about the time the pandemic happened, we had thought that we might do that. Not that, more of like statistics and kind of talking points and impacts on something visible to volunteers. But with the way our schedule is set up, volunteers would come in, kind of do a specific set of tasks, and then kind of be gone for some weeks. We'd heard great things from like the food bank that they dedicated 15 minutes at the start of every shift to get everyone on the same page and really do that kind of huddle. Our volunteers would trickle in over the course of an hour, and then we'd individually train them for like 15 minutes on the task. We just trained the person next to them who got there 5 minutes earlier was trained on. So our schedule didn't really facilitate that well. And similarly for like the daily huddle with staff, they would come to work and 15 minutes later, there's a bunch of volunteers coming in. So the big challenge has always been carving out a time, even 3 or 5 minutes, to like stop what everyone's doing and dive into this huddle. I have been able to now make a 45-minute weekly team meeting in the middle of the day, and that's where this board is helpful for kind of what are the things we need to remember, what are the new things that have come up, what are the big tasks that need to be tackled. Still not really using it effectively, but it's got a little momentum in that direction.
Thanks, Matt, for the question and the comment too. I do agree about, a lot of the progress and improvement is due to your commitment, and also the commitment to, like, I'll expand on that to say the commitment to like the foundation of the lean principles, like carrying forward the how might 5S work here? Is this pull or is this push? How does this relate to our value stream, and continuing that thinking? So I think that's really great. And then there was something else that I was going to say that I escaped my mind. Maybe it will come back. But anyway, I wanted to, if there's no more questions right now, open it up to a couple of breakout rooms. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, I think that what I learned out of this too, as of, helping out, I think the discussions around the volunteer experience was really valuable for me. And I think that's something that we can bring back to our work is, it kind of ties back to that, what you're talking about, John, is this respectful work or is this meaningful work? Mm-hmm. And also we shouldn't just do something because it doesn't seem value added. If there is a learning that goes with it for the volunteer or some kind of development for them or an enjoyment there, that there's a value to that we want to make sure that we keep in mind. And so I thought the discussions we had around the volunteer experience and even trying to come up with ways of measuring that as a way to also be success for our process and for your organization. I thought that was really what I learned a lot out of that experience. And so I think that's something that we should always be considering, even whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, is that is part of the work and there is value to the type of work being done.
Even the volunteer experience on our side.
Yeah. Sure.
Like us as volunteers, right?
Yeah.
And I remember the other thing that I was going to say was, when we did the value stream mapping, we did it together in real time. And that is often more productive and makes much more progress than talking about it in a meeting and then, you know, leaving it up to us as a collective to like, and we'll do this after the meeting. That rarely works. So I think that was a good point too. Thank you, John, so much for
Thanks, John.
sharing your story. And I think you guys are doing great work.